Today I show you how to cut aluminium profiles at home without power tools, just a few simple tools. You can use a cutter or a pencil to draw on the aluminium, a ruler, and a special blade for cutting metal. This is a metal blade, and if you notice, I inserted the sharp edge of the cutter inside this manual cutting jig. I like to do it like that for metal, especially for aluminium, because it's more easy. And this is the aluminium profile. I need to cut this in 4 equal pieces, more or less. Precision is not really so important for me here, but still it's nice to have them look right. And I will show you an example of how I measure and I mark the tape. When using the measuring tape, I draw a V like this, and the point where the two lines intersect is where the actual point is. It's much easier to read it later when it's like a V in this way, so you don't get confused if it's a line where the line starts or ends. Then I use a ruler, metal ruler.
This needs a bit of adjusting and cutting. It's a bit not great there. But this one is much better.
You can really use a pencil if it's important to have a nice looking profile, but yeah, actually what I was showing you earlier, it's not the place where I cut it. It was just an example for you, so I ruined my aluminium profile just to show you this. I already measured them. When you start cutting the aluminium, don't put downwards pressure and start really slowly. Using the cutter actually helps to guide the metal blade of the cutter. The cutter helps to keep the blade, the metal cutting blade, in the position, so it doesn't go left or right. And while you cut it, really you don't need to put pressure on it. That's why I put this blade inside of this saw. When I got this saw, I had the metal blade and the wood blade. I never used the wood blade, but for metal it's really useful to be able to cut metallic materials, profiles. You can cut steel, anything, any metal with this. Aluminium is a bit more difficult to cut because it's a soft metal and the blade tends to get blocked a little bit. If it's a bit difficult to cut it, you can use WD-40 to lubricate the blade to make it easier. And now I show you a really nice trick. When you cut, move this blade of the saw on the long edge of this piece you're cutting, on the line you want to do, and it will start it much easier. You see, in this way it doesn't take much time to cut it. Usually these profiles, they're not very thick. If you have really thick aluminium, you might consider to use a power tool, for example anything, even a angle grinder. I mean, it depends on the thickness really. And when you cut, if you need precision, it's better to cut bigger than what you need, like leave a bit of room for error.
Okay, maybe not exactly straight.
And then sand it down to the size, the precision, the precise size you need, or use a polishing tool to do that. It's much easier to sand it down. You have to sand it anyway, because after cutting it, even though the aluminium is soft, there are really sharp edges, and also there is this burr of material that's on the edges. You want to remove that. I also like to make these edges a bit rounder, so they're not too sharp. The profiles, you can use electric tape or painter's tape, marking tape, to on the cutting area, so you don't have these edges too much like I have here. That helps a bit, and also not to mark directly on the material. But I didn't need to use tape. I could have used it, but I thought okay. So yeah, now I have to cut it again, and I cut both of them in the middle. This way I aligned the edges, and more or less I will have equal pieces of the same material. And I start slowly again without putting any downwards pressure. I just move it, slide this metal saw back and forth, and if it gets stuck, and it's most likely going to get stuck at some point, you can use a little bit of WD-40 spray on it to lubricate the blade and make it easier to work. The same works for drilling. When you will need to drill holes into it, it's much easier to drill the holes if you use a bit of WD-40 on the material, on the metal. Now I speed it up a little bit so you don't get too bored watching the video, but it's the same thing basically. You see how I lean into it, I make the blade a little bit lower, and it's nice to avoid going left and right like this, but this is all, it all depends where you use this for. For me it really doesn't matter, but if you really want a high quality cut, you should actually get a specialized tool, a special saw for cutting aluminium. There are saw blades made for cutting aluminium. Also, there are jigs you can use even to cut manually like this, but to have a jig where you are restricted to a specific area to cut, especially if you're cutting angles like 45-degree angles. You could cut an angle without a jig, but it's much easier and much more precise with the jig. For me, this, even here, it looks perfect. I was even thinking it's perfect, but if you turn those profiles around, you will see that they're not exactly perfect, and it's fine. If I wanted them to be ideal, I wouldn't get a saw because it's too expensive. I only need to do this once in a while. Maybe I will cut them a bit higher and then use a file to trim them down to the size I need if I really need the really precision size. But this is actually only a support for a LED strip, heat sink, and support. The aluminum will take the heat away from the LEDs and also keep them in place. Thanks for watching. Let me know how you cut aluminum profiles.